Well, good afternoon. I'm Daniel Benjamin. I'm the director of the Dickey Center, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this event with Atifete Jahjaga, who served as the president of Kosovo from 2011 until earlier this year. Let me begin by thanking the Montgomery Fellows Program and its director, Klaus Milich, for bringing President Jahjaga to Dartmouth this summer and for working with us to allow us to extend her stay so that more students and members of the community could have the remarkable experience of listening to, learning from, and actually meeting a head of state. I think it's hard to overstate just how valuable her stay has been to the community. Just yesterday, for example, the president met with 3 undergraduates and a medical student from Geisel who participated in the Dickey Center's Global Health Initiative and who had spent last summer working on a project assessing healthcare in Kosovo. And it was a terrific moment for all of us, and very exciting to know that those lessons are being passed on to someone who is in a position to advocate for them and to carry that project forward when she comes home. I was particularly eager to have the president stay and be part of a series of events that we are planning for this fall within the Dickey Center's gender pillar. And in fact, hers is the first of these events, and it is a series that will address issues regarding women policymakers and policies towards women around the globe. Among the lessons we have learned in international affairs in the last 20 years, none may be more dramatic than the benefits to societies that accrue from the empowerment of women. And economists and policymakers, from Nobel laureate Amartya Sen to IMF chairman Christine Lagarde, have made it very clear that investment in the education of women and girls provides absolutely extraordinary benefits in terms of poverty alleviation, greater agency in family planning, and social change. And it's for this reason that the World Bank, national development agencies, certainly across the West, and many NGOs have made women's empowerment a top priority. And Western governments are increasingly exploring how women can play a greater role in such diverse areas as conflict resolution, countering extremism, and democracy promotion. And we also know from experience that women policymakers are often the ones who are most attuned to the improvements that such investments can make, and they have been absolutely vital in advancing justice within their societies and introducing the change that is needed to make their societies more prosperous, more peaceful, and more equitable for all members. So it's wonderful that we can begin this series of events with someone who has been at the pinnacle of power in a very young country that faces very great challenges, as well as someone who's distinguished herself as one of the great talents on the international stage today. Someone who I am absolutely confident will make the natural transition to leading a major international organization as soon as our friends in Europe and other parts of the world get over their hang-ups and their misguided efforts to keep Kosovo out of the UN, and allow it to enter into the many global organizations that require UN membership as a condition of participation. By way of background, Atifete Jahjaga grew up in Kosovo and graduated from the University of Pristina at the Faculty of Law in 2000. She has also studied at the University of Leicester in the UK and had extensive professional training at the Marshall Center in Germany and at the FBI National Academy in the US. And after the war in Kosovo, she completed Kosovo's police academy training to become an officer and was gradually promoted to the highest ranks, eventually winding up, I believe, the number 2 person in the young country's police force. While serving in that force, she attracted the attention of many international diplomats who saw her as a great young rising star, and that they were not the only ones who noticed her talents. When there was a constitutional crisis in 2010 and 11, She was picked as a consensus candidate for the president of Kosovo by two of its largest parties. And this was, of course, before Kosovo had full independence, and the Western diplomats who had a large say in Kosovo also lined up behind her. On April 7th of 2011, she was elected president on the first ballot. Of 100 members of parliament who were president, 80 voted for her. And to date, she's the only president to have been elected in the first round of voting. Her tenure was marked by a passionate support for strengthening democracy and the rule of law, for constitutionalism, and for closer relations with Europe and the United States. She was a strong champion of anti-corruption efforts and recognized it as the scourge of young and developing countries. She was also a determined opponent of extremism, and she participated in a conference we had earlier this week on countering violent extremism in the Balkans and elsewhere. Under her leadership, women's roles in Kosovo have also been advanced, and in 2012, she hosted an international women's summit called Partnership for Change, Empowering Women, that I know had strong support from Washington, and that was attended by 200 leaders from around the world. She's also been, and I think this is very noteworthy, especially active in pressing her country to confront the legacy of sexual violence, which had been so widespread and devastating in Kosovo during the war. In short, at a time when we think that we are very short on leaders, we find an extraordinarily talented one coming to us from a very young country in the heart of Europe. And I think that without going on any longer, it is time for us to give her our attention. President Jahjaga.
Good afternoon to everyone. Ambassador Benjamin, thank you very much. Thank you very much for making me a part of the Dickey Center for this last month, being with as the Montgomery Fellow. And also my appreciation goes to Dr. Klaus for sparing me this last month with the Dickey Center, where I had an honor and privilege not only being with academics within the Dickey Center, but also with the many students which has enriched me with many of their background and the way that they see these issues at the moment. But one more time, thank you very much, and Barry, thank you for being here today. It is a distinguished honor for me to be here today with you, and it is really great to be back again in Hanover after some important visits and the travels I had during this month, first back to Kosovo and then to Jordan, where I had the honor to chair the Common International Observation Mission of the National Democratic Institute and the International Republican Institute during the September 20th parliamentary elections in Jordan. What an honor, and yes, a lot of travel, but somebody has to do that. But it's such a pleasure to be back and to be with you here today. Some of you are meeting me here for the first time, while some others have maybe had the chance to hear me talk early this July when I spoken about empowerment, the women empowerment and the leadership. And today I will talk about a slightly different topic, talk about the role of the women in the policy making. In times when the world is facing numerous problems and challenges which require immediate action, such as terrorism, refugee crisis, poverty, global warming, and many other global challenges that we are facing every day, we need to create sustainable solutions by initiating practical policies and setting effective policy agendas. It is a duty of each country to be committed towards resolving these outstanding issues in an inclusive manner by considering all important parties and stakeholders. An increased participation of women in policy making enhances public trust in institutions and legitimizes the political process. Throughout history, we have seen how women leadership changed the course of history, the everyday life of the people in their communities and across the globe. By proving ourselves to be agents of change, of peace, of conflict resolutions, of state-building processes, creating a safer and a more just world for everyone. Raising their voice and speaking up about injustice and inequality when the rest preferred to be silent became the norm for many powerful women. Women like Secretary Clinton and Secretary Albright have used their influence and diplomacy to end human suffering and make peace the norm of the day. And to make women part of the decision-making process in their communities and countries. And I can only say to both of these leaders, you have my sincere gratitude. But there are also other women with different profiles who continue to set an example for young girls around the globe, who I admire for their dedication, commitment, and for their hard work. I enjoyed listening to the renowned Lebanese-British human rights advocate, activist and author Amal Clooney last week when she addressed the United Nations about the need to act against the Islamic State. And look at what British actress, the UN Global the Goodwill Ambassador Emma Watson is doing with her continuous engagement on the gender equality. And what American actress and special envoy to the United Nations Refugee Agency, Angelina Jolie, is doing on major crises that result in mass population displacement. Extraordinary and very inspiring. Many women are fighting for their right to be in the position they have and voice issue of concern, when in fact it should not be a fight at all, as it is our fundamental right. It is a human right to be equal and to equally contribute to resolving current challenges and crises. Now, when you think about how this can be done, how we can get more women to participate and be an important stakeholder in policy making, you instantly think about change. Because if we want to have more women working in the public and the private sector, we need to change the current situation, overcome institutional barriers, provide incentives, education, training, and space, more or less. So we are talking about a positive change, and change is exactly the goal of the policies. There are countless reasons why women should be a part of the policy-making procedures, but let me underline some of them. As first, representation has to be guaranteed for all members of the community. Policies are made for people to improve their lives and make living easier and better. Policies can only reflect the real needs of the community if the needs of men and women, black and whites, those with a higher income and those with a low income are taken into account. It would be injustice if only men, for instance, would decide on the family planning policy when it also affects the women. Second, policymaking is a complex process where different ideas, perspectives, and alternatives have to be considered. Our differences, given by nature, are not bad if we combine them in joint work and are able, through teamwork, to find optimal solutions for policy problems. Third, and this is a very vital argument, we need to change the course of history. We need to get rid of the stereotypes, primitivism, and short-sightedness which ruled our mindset in the past. Finding some of the anthropologists on the evolution of the Homo sapiens struck me when I read some interesting facts. They found societies in which sexual asymmetry carries no connotation of dominance or subordination. Furthermore, they found that tasks performed by both genders are indispensable for group survival, that genders are complementary, that their roles and status are different but equal at the same time. I don't agree at all with traditionalists who believe that God created us differently, so that women have to subordinate to the man. This viewpoint has damaged us so much over these past years, and now we are suffering the negative consequences of that. In conflict-affected societies, and those societies undergoing democratic transitions, like it's the case of my own country, Kosovo, women are important stakeholders, but often their agency has been ignored. In the past 8 years, since Kosovo has declared its independence, we have strengthened our sovereignty. The role of the women in these processes is indisputable. They helped transform a war-torn country into a vivid and sustainable society. During the Serbian repression, Kosovo women has raised their voice against ethnic cleansing, genocide, inequality, aggression, and massive violation of the human lives. After the war, they guided us in our aspiration to build healthy communities, paving the way for our young people to have better opportunities and aim higher in their careers. We have learned that democracy is complex and not easily to be built. We are still learning how to live together and how to work together and how to keep the hope that things will change, but for the better. I learned this in the hard way. Having seen the world that so many generations before me built with hard work, shattered and torn by the war, and living most of my childhood in fear, I wanted to contribute in making Kosovo a different country, a safer country, a country of the rule of law. As a former president and as a first woman president in the southeastern part of Europe, I had the pleasure, but also a burden, to be part of an important peacekeeping, peacemaking, and policy-making processes during my 5 years term in the office. When I took over office back in 2011, as Ambassador Benjamin has said, Kosovo was facing with the turbulent times. The country was in a deep political, social, and economic crisis. People were striving for change and were desperately in need for a leader who would unify the divided, include those left out, and reach out to those who were almost forgotten by the system. I felt it was my moral duty to meet this expectation and work towards improvement and prosperity for my own country. As in most societies, the difference between men and women in Kosovo is slightly in favor of men, by slightly less than 1% to be exact. This proportion does, however, not reflect the makeup of our public institution, businesses, nonprofit organizations, or the media. Out of total 22 ministries of our government only 3 are led by the woman. A similar representation existed also in the previous government, where only 3 out of the 19 ministries were led by the women. The representation of women in independent public agencies, boards, and independent institutions is disappointing as well. Only 2 out of the 5 public independent institutions and 26 independent agencies are led by the woman. The composition of our parliament is a bit different due to the 30% gender quota requirement. In reality, though, women are undermined by their political parties, which often do not take them seriously as members, leaders, or candidates of these parties. Democracies are systems which guarantee equal rights for all, and it is more than necessary to live up to those standards, not only on the paper, but in our real life. In a democratic system, people vote for politicians so they can represent them in state institutions. Depending on the political system, executive powers are either given to the president, as it is here in the United States, or to the government, as is the case in my country of Kosovo. In the parliamentary system, like ours, the government is established by the party which wins most of the votes and has the highest number of the lawmakers in the parliament. Unlike in the United States, a presidential democracy, in Kosovo, the government is accountable to the parliament. Yet, both institutions have to play their part in the policy-making process. Policy-making in Kosovo takes a long road from the development of a vision proposal or a vision policy to the final policy. Although I was not directly responsible for making policies, because this has not been granted by the constitution of my country, but I have taken that as a responsibility of being as the head of state. I cooperated with the government and the parliament, and I was continuously in touch with opposition members of the parliament, the civil society, and the medias. I tried to serve, and I consider myself as a facilitator and a catalyst in pushing forward our policy agendas. Some of the key goals of the Kosovo, when I have taken over my office back in 2011, have been, and they continue to be, the integration of Kosovo towards the European Union, the need to dramatically decrease the level of the corruption, and the necessity to internally come to terms with the war by granting rights for war victims. Our institutions were already working on these issues, but I believed progress needed to happen much quicker and much faster. I felt that could coordinate our activities better if there was a platform we could use to inform each other about the successes and obstacles we face in our efforts for change. Therefore, upon taking over my office, I have established 3 national councils chaired by the president, chaired by myself, in accordance to the constitution of my country. The National Council for the European Integration, National Council for the effective fight against organized crime and the corruption, and the last one, the National Council for the survivors of the sexual violence during the wartime in Kosovo. While the former 2 were comprised of the officials depending on their government portfolios, the latter was made up by mainly the women. The reason for this was very clear. During the Kosovo War, thousands of Kosovo women and men were raped by the Serbian military and paramilitary troops, who also barbarously killed, massacred, and tortured thousands of the civilians. More than 10,000 men and women, children and elderly, were killed. And although there is no official data yet on raped women during the war, it is believed that their number goes up to some 20,000. While legal measures were taken to compensate other categories of war victims, such as war martyrs and their families, former Kosovo Liberation Army fighters, war invalids, and missing persons, war rape survivors were left totally neglected. When I look at the legislation in place, I was upset, at the same time shocked. How come had we forgotten these horrific things that these women, these our citizens, went through? And how come were we not able to speak up for all those traumatized women, but let them isolated instead and suffering, while the rest of us were enjoying our freedom? After several months of research and gathering the first-hand evidence by talking to many war rape survivors, I decided it was high time to start and to do something. The representative composition of the National Council for the Survivors of the Sexual Violence during the war was a critical element for addressing this issue properly. Because war rape survivors should be represented and dignified in a very dignified way and respectful manner through this process. Also, due to the sensitivity of the issue, rape survivors mainly trusted women and were very careful when they were talking to the man. Having in mind that the Council will deal with the war rape survivors, most of whom were women, I believe they needed to be represented in it and even be a part of it, because I was doing and we were doing this for them, if they would only wish to. Despite inviting and involving ministers with key portfolios in the country within our government, as the Minister of the Social Welfare, Minister of Justice, and the Minister of Health, and the others, I want to make sure that the key agencies, parliamentary commissions, and non-governmental organizations who are dedicated to gender equality and human rights were also a part of our work. Furthermore, I continue to meet and talk to the war rape survivors myself, personally, on a regular basis, in order to get a clear view of their problems, of their challenges, and mostly about their needs. During several meetings of the Council, we managed to bring this issue, finally, towards the Kosovo's parliament, which finally amended the existing legislation on war victims. And for the first time after the war, the silence has been broken. For the first time after the war rape survivors were legally protected and supported. And for the first time after the war, our society has acknowledged the crime which was committed unjustly towards them. This was very important because there was and still is a need for our society to internally come to terms with the war, to accept what has happened, to talk about the crimes and not to silence them, to support each other and to remove the shame and stigma that many rape survivors felt when they have talked about what they have gone through. Thus, the National Council for the Survivors of the Sexual Violence during the war became a vital component in initiating more procedures towards the national vision for peace and for reconciliation. When talking about initiations, another thing the Council did was creating a practical infrastructure for the formation of the governmental commission, which will be mandated to verify the number of the war rape survivors. The secretariat of this commission is already in place now, and I hope that its members can be appointed before the end of this year, so it can be functional soon in order to, at least, deliver inner peace to thousands of the war rape survivors in my country. Much will depend on the government and how the process develops, and much will depend on our lawmakers, the civil society, and the media, who should not be satisfied with what we have achieved, but who need to continue work and yield more success. And when talking about success, let me underline one more thing. The way to success cannot be taken by ignoring women. It cannot be taken by undermining our values, our skills, and our qualities. After Kosovo became independent in 2008, our leadership cannot blame anyone for guaranteeing equal rights to women and men. And by using the notion of equal rights, I'm not talking only about laws and policies, but I'm referring to their creation and to their more concrete implementation. I'm talking about the need to respect our right to be part of the change process. I'm talking about the right to lead change, to create vital policies for our communities, to determine our national policy agenda. These processes should be inclusive and not embezzled by any dominated group. In an attempt to overcome prejudices about women and pave the way for a more powerful role of the women in the public and private sector in Kosovo. In 2012, as referred in the beginning here by Ambassador Benjamin, I organized the International Women's Summit titled Partnership for Change, Empowering the Women. The summit brought together powerful and influential women leaders from all over the world, starting from the U.S. Secretary of State, former U.S. Secretary of State, Secretary Albright, U.S. Ambassador at large at that time for the global women issues, Melan Verveer, and many other women from almost 200 countries around the world. And doing our work, we agreed that countries all over the world need to enhance the role of the women for the various reasons. When women are empowered as political leaders, countries often experience higher standards of living and positive developments in education, in infrastructure, and in health. Expanding political participation to include women can improve the functioning of governments, legislatures, and political parties, and can help government provide more tangible benefits for its own citizens. Expanding women's political participation leads to tangible gains for the democratic governance. Women's full and active participation in policies results in positive dividends, including policy development that is more responsive to citizens' needs, increased cooperation across party lines, and more sustainable peace. Talking about the problems women face in politics, public policy, economy, and other areas is just touching the top of the iceberg. The real problems are rooted much deeper and can therefore be tackled only if we actively participate, removing prejudices about the skills and our capacities, and in breaking glass ceilings. And as my dear friend, Secretary Hillary Clinton said the other day so nicely, when there are no ceilings, sky is the limit. When the sky is the limit, we won't need to speak up about these unjust differentials, but we will be able to act and become part of the change. And it is a high time to change. So let's not only dream about sky being our limit, but let's actively work towards making this dream come true. And speaking about the sky as a limit, in November, you will surely have the chance to actively participate in creating a new and a positive change. And I hope you will use this chance wisely. Thank you so much. It has been a pleasure to be with you today.